Whoever said the Bible is boring maybe never actually read it. The Bible is chock full of excitement. You just have to be willing to dive in. So turn the volume up, grab your favorite beverage, and settle in with me as we dive into the greatest love story ever told, the Bible. You're tuning into Not Your Mama's Bible Study, because Bible study was never meant to be boring. I'm your host, Chrystan Farrell. Welcome to the show. Well, hey there, friends, and welcome back to Not Your Mama's Bible Study. Welcome back to Season 12, where we are taking children's Bible stories and retelling them and studying them with a deeper theology, a bigger outlook, y'all. It is not just for kids. So that's what we're doing this season, and I'm so glad you keep coming back to the table with me. And if you're new here, welcome. We love it here. We love you. We're glad you're here. If you're an OG, so glad that you keep coming back every single week and telling your friends and sending me messages. I love your DMs. I love your emails. Keep them coming. Make sure you're getting that reading plan, which is free to download every single season. There's a reading plan for you. It is found at ChristanFarrell.com/podcast. All of the reading plans for all of the seasons can be found on that page. Welcome in. Have a seat. We are doing Daniel and the Lion's Den today. Some of us know this story very well. We've heard it a million times. Some of us maybe never heard it before. The OG, the old school version of Daniel and the Lion's Den. And if you love a good visual picture, join me on YouTube and you get to see the feltboard children's version of this if you are watching. You guys, I'm trying to get really good at this because I was really excited about this idea, and sometimes my little people don't stick, so I don't super duper love that. Here we go. Daniel and the Lion's Den. King Darius was the ruler over Babylon. He picked 120 wise men who would help him rule. That's a lot of opinions, y'all. I don't think I would want that many opinions. Over them, he appointed 3 advisors in charge. 1, 2, and number 3, which is Daniel. Over him, he appointed 3 advisors in charge, and Daniel was the leader of the 3. He was a faithful servant of the king, and the king loved him so much. King Darius even thought about making Daniel the next king of Babylon. The other advisors were jealous of Daniel and sought to find some fault against him, but they could not. Daniel was clever and faithful, as he did everything to the very best he could. Then those men decided to trap Daniel. They knew nothing would stop Daniel from worshiping the God of Israel. So they made a plan and convinced King Darius to sign off on a new law in which he requested everyone should only pray to King Darius, and those who disobeyed should be thrown into the den of lions. Daniel understood the new law, yet he still knelt and prayed 3 times a day as before to God. His jealous rivals saw this, accused Daniel to the king, and urged Daniel to be executed as stated in the new law. King Darius was devastated, but he knew the law was law and no one should be an exception. Daniel was then sentenced to death by being put into a lion's den. Before Daniel was thrown into the den by the guard, King Darius said to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, your God will deliver you." That night was a sleepless night for the king, and at first light of dawn, he rushed back to the lion's den. King Darius shouted, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God," turning the page, "has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions?" Maybe he didn't expect an answer, but Daniel replied. Daniel said, King, my God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, my king. King Darius was delighted and ordered the guard to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. The king knew God had delivered Daniel and that Daniel's enemies were God's enemies. And at the king's command, the men who falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, and the lions ate them. That is very graphic. Then the king wrote a letter to all the nations and peoples of every language on earth and commanded them to worship the living God. And the king restored Daniel to honor and leadership. Boy, what a story for us and the children in children's church. So, what a time it must have been to be alive where they had lions. Hey, so the book of Daniel. Here's the thing. The big theological theme of this story is faithfulness and exile and God's deliverance. Key scriptures here. Well, really, the key scripture is Daniel 6, which is the story of Daniel during that time, and then the lion's den, and then what happened after. This story is also mentioned in Hebrews 11:32 through 40, which is known as the Hall of Faith. And so, if I remember, we'll read that in a minute, but I want to talk a little bit about what was going on during this time, how the book of Daniel is about, and just give us let's take a little journey back to the way back of the Old Testament, and let's talk about what was going on during this time. So, the events in the book of Daniel take place between 605 BC and 530 BC. This is during the time of the nation of Judah's Babylonian captivity. The book opens after King Nebuchadnezzar's first siege in Judah. Y'all, this is all like background history. You're either going to love it or you're not. This was King Nebuchadnezzar's first siege of Judah in 605 BC when he brought Daniel along with other captives from Judean nobility to Babylon. Okay, that's kind of where we're at. Daniel's ministry began when he arrived in Babylon. I can't speak. In Babylon with those first captives. It extended throughout the Babylonian captivity and concluded after the third year of Cyrus the Great. Okay, so there's a lot of history going on in this time. So tradition maintains that the prophet Daniel, so Daniel was a prophet, wrote this book sometime shortly after the end of Babylonian captivity, and the book contains retellings of the events of his life, as well as some supernatural predictions of events that took place during the period. Daniel is written to the Jewish exiles in Babylon to remind them of God's sovereignty and to encourage them to remain faithful to God even amid their difficult circumstances, which obviously Daniel has some experience in. So he's writing from firsthand experience that God is faithful even when things are rough. Okay? So rough that you're hanging out in a lion's den by yourself. So, the message and purpose of this book is that Daniel is the hope that the people of God have during hard times. So this specifically is the times of the Gentiles, a phrase that's used by Jesus to refer to the time between Babylonian captivity and Jesus's return. This is a lengthy time when God's people lived under an ungodly rule, and the book of Daniel offers hope in his teaching that at all times the Most High God is ruler over human kingdoms. To encourage Israel's faithfulness to its sovereign God, Daniel recounted examples of godly trust and delivered prophecies of God's ultimate victory. Here's why we can give thanks for the book of Daniel. This is what my Bible says. Above all, Daniel teaches that God, the God of Israel, is the sovereign God of the universe. So our God is the sovereign God of the universe, for his dominion is an everlasting dominion. So he is in everlasting reign over his kingdom. This is from generation to generation. Even when wicked empires have extensive reign, the prophet's words remind us that only the Lord has dominion over all the kingdoms of the earth. It's just God. God's got it under control. And y'all, we could end the teaching right there. Okay? Right there. We could just say, hey, God's got it. It's fine. It's going to be fine. But we're not going to end there, y'all. We're not going to end there. We're going to talk a little bit more in depth about Daniel and this lion's den and how this all happened. So I have in my what? Okay. Daniel was an important guy. Okay. Um, so just he was a prophet. God has this general tendency to put people in places of authority for very specific reasons. He's been doing it since the very beginning of time. And Daniel was no exception to that common story of God and his people. And Daniel is a prophet, so he's a man of God, is a guy that really glorifies God with his life, that has a lot of wisdom and has had some experience doing some dream interpretation and things like that. And so he is put in a seat of authority in which he gets to advise the king with his wisdom, which is God. God is has put him in this position for a reason. So part of Daniel's story is that he's been put in this position, and also it just happens to be in a time when, because of jealousy and because of envy, the other advisors are saying, hey, this guy has so much favor, like how can we get him out of here? And so they have this rule that you can't pray to anybody or worship anybody but the king. And they kind of trick the king, which is sort of referenced in what we just read in the children's story, but they tricked the king into signing this decree, which has kind of got these things slipped into it. See, politicians are going to be politicians even from day one. See, our politicians of today do the same thing. They have these big giant bills and they try to sneak some things into it. That's neither here nor there, but it's just a funny thing that I realized this has been happening since the beginning of time. So now what we have as one of the deeper theology points is living faithfully under foreign rule points to the church's life in the world. So what Daniel's doing is he is under the rule of a foreign place. This is a Babylonian captivity. So his people are being ruled and reigned over by somebody else that's not part of their, the word is gonna, it's not like part of their culture or part of their nation. They're being ruled over by somebody else. So it's not a great time. It's not a great time. And because of this foreign rule, there's like oppression and there's these rules and these things that don't align with who they are as a people group, who they are as a religious group, who they are in their and as their own nation. And so they're being reigned and ruled over in a way that is not honoring to their life. Okay. This is very representative of how the church is in the world, that we have things about us. I wouldn't want to say rules, but values and morals that don't align with the way that the world is run today. And so this is kind of foreshadowing. I don't want to say foreshadowing. It points to this. This is how we live. This is how we're living right now. We are living in a society that does not align with our values, and even some of our values in some areas are, it's against the law to say certain things or do certain things in a certain way that is honoring and representative of Christian values, Christian morals and values. So then we have this other next layer of civil disobedience, which is obeying God over human authority. So what happens in the story is Daniel prayed in front of his window, which, that was a decision. Like he made a decision to pray where people could see him, which is so great. But he went and prayed in front of his window, which I don't think the story mentions, and he is found out. He is seen praying to somebody other than the king, and because he wasn't going to let a human ruler supersede or be over his faith and his allegiance to God and what he felt convicted and what he knew was right in that situation. He was not going to be under the thumb and the rule in such a way that it caused him to not honor God with his life. So there is a part in the Bible where Jesus, and I didn't look this up, but it just came to mind. There is a part in the Bible where Jesus says, let Caesar be Caesar, let Caesar have what Caesar's going to have. And he's talking about tax paying and just following. He talks about following the laws of the land. So there is something to be said for, we are called to civil obedience up until they break our obedience to God. If the law and the rules cause us to be disobedient to God, then that's where we are called to civil disobedience. Otherwise, God says, nobody comes into a seat of authority except through me. So I let everybody come into authority. So as much as you can, live in peace with them and honor the laws of the land, but do not do so in disobedience of me. So that's what we're called to. That's what we are supposed to be doing in the lands that we're in. That means that we can't worship other gods. That means that we can't defile our bodies. That means that we need to uphold the 10 commandments and what God has for us and the better story that God has for us in his word. Outside of that, we are also called to civil obedience. We're only called to disobedience when that tension happens and we have to choose between obedience to God and obedience to a nation. And the choice is always to obedience to God. So that was the tension that Daniel was in. He went ahead and he prayed, and the other advisors caught him because they were looking for him because they knew that he was faithful. Listen, I love that Daniel's life has lived in such a way that these guys knew that he would not waver. What a great way to live your life, that the leaders and the people around you know that you will not waver in your faith. They know what to expect out of you. And, these guys knew that they were going to catch Daniel. They knew that it wasn't going to be long and Daniel was going to be praying to God because they knew that he had an unwavering faith. What an incredible hashtag goal for us. Hashtag goals. Be like Daniel. Pray like Daniel. Live out our faith like Daniel, which is why he ends up in the Hall of Faith in the book of Hebrews, which we'll hopefully remember to read in a minute. So he breaks the law. They call him out on it. They take him to the king. The king is like, oh, shucks. I really should have read the fine print, but I didn't. A law is a law. If I waver for you, then how's that going to look? So I can't waver for you. You're a great guy. Sorry. Listen, I bet God's going to save you. Like Darius, what a spineless dude, but whatever. And I think he probably has regrets because it sounds like he worries all night long. So Daniel gets thrown in the lion's den. I did want to read here. The king went to his palace. Okay. At first light, Daniel spoke, may the king live forever. May the king live forever. My God has sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they haven't harmed me, for I was found innocent before him and also before you, your majesty. I have not done harm. The king was overjoyed and removed Daniel from the lion's den. Now, God sent an angel to shut the mouths of the lions. That's what God did. So God closes the mouths of the lions, pointing to the ultimate deliverance from death. So y'all, this is a Christ connection. The Christ connection is that Jesus is the true innocent who was placed in the den of death, but emerged alive. So this is a foreshadowing or a way to connect Christ to God provides a way out from death. And he does that by delivering the people from death, which is through Jesus. Jesus is the true innocent who was placed in the den of death, but emerged alive. Daniel was placed in the den of death, but emerged alive because of God. That is our special Christ connection. And, one thing that Daniel could have done in this moment is he could have cursed the king up one side and down the other. He could have been mad. He could have bragged and said, nanny, nanny, boo boo, you can't get me, But instead, he gave honor to the king. He gave honor to the king and then glorified God by saying what God had done and bragging on God and what God had done. And that's wild, because he had every right to be mad. He had every right to gloat. He had every right to even be disrespectful. But instead, he said, may the king live forever. This is what God did. And then it says, just a reminder, I come in peace. Like, I didn't do anything really to harm you or to be disrespectful. And you threw me in the lion's den. Like, I'm not that guy. Like, I'm your guy, up until the point where you make me choose between my allegiance to you or my allegiance to God. And it's always going to be my allegiance to God. Today, in today's world, we want to do a lot more rubbing people's nose in their mistakes. We want to do a lot more woe is me. We want to do a lot more blaming and disrespecting and being judgmental. And, we have an opportunity to say, that doesn't align with my faith. I respect you. I want to honor you, but I want to honor God most. And, that's such a different response than getting mad and getting angry. God calls us to a righteous anger. And Daniel had every right to be angry here, but instead he pointed it back to God. He remained bold in his faith without dishonoring God, without being obnoxious, without, burning things to the ground. And that was honoring to God. And in that process, it changed the way that the king responded, and it set that group of people free from religious oppression. Daniel's actions impacted his entire nation just by this action. Just by how he trusted God to remained faithful to God in the process, and then honored God in his response. And because of that, the king then decreed that everybody could worship God freely. God, the man, the myth, the legend, God, our God, G-O-D with a capital G. So how can we apply this to today as adults walking around in 2025 when this is being recorded, and everything that's going on in our world and all the things that we see out in our culture? Like, how can this impact us in the way that we live, in the way that we respond, in the political climate of today, in the way that our nation is run? And as we're moving forward, what we know from what the Bible says, it's not really going to get any better, you guys. It's probably just going to get worse as we continue to get closer to the end of the world as we know it. Jesus is going to come back. There's going to be all of the things. Heaven's going to be aligned back with earth. It's just, there's going to be a lot's going to happen, y'all. But right now, in today, I think my question for you is, where do you need courage to obey God when pressured to compromise? This world loves a compromise. They really, really like to see Christians compromising their faith. And I don't mean that in a jerky way and a woe is me way, and we're always being picked on and all this kind of stuff. But y'all, we are always being picked on, okay? The world is after us. And honestly, in response to that, let's be after the world. Like, Daniel came into this to glorify and honor God and made a big giant change for the people in his community and turned the king's head in favor of God. Where do you need courage to obey God when pressured to compromise? We're called to compromises right and left out in the culture right now. So first off, I'm always going to point you back to God. I'm always going to point you back to knowing the truth for yourself. The best way to combat compromise is to be knowledgeable about what the truth is. Daniel knew that we were called not to worship any other God, that we were not called to bow towards any other God, and that we are not to pray to anybody but God. He knew the truth for himself, and he let that inform the decision that he made. So the best way to avoid being pressured in compromise and to know what to stand on is to know the truth for yourself and know how to apply that to your life. Also, the Holy Spirit plays a super big role in this because you're going to know as you sit closely to God, as you know the truth for yourself, and as you tap into the resource that is the Holy Spirit inside of you, you're going to know when I'm not supposed to do that. Like, I'm not supposed to compromise here. I'm supposed to be bold in my faith here. Or you're going to know what to say and when to shut your mouth. You're going to know when to step out boldly and when to pray and let God lead you to do so. I have spent the last few years learning how to bite my tongue and also to use my tongue. Like, I've learned how to rein it in and also fight the battle. Because there are times where we are called to rein it in, but there's times where we're called to fight the battle. And we've got to learn how to tap into the Holy Spirit so that we know the difference. Daniel knew. So what we didn't see Daniel do was when the decree went out, we didn't see him go guns blazing after these guys and all of that. We saw him remain faithful and obedient to what he needed to remain faithful and obedient to. So he wasn't called to go and fight, but he was called to go in faith instead, to remain faithful to what he had and have that be his response. There's a word for us in that, you guys. There's a challenge for us in that as we continue to operate in a post-Christian society. We don't live in a Christian nation really anymore. We would like to think that we do. It makes us feel warm and fuzzy, but really the way that our nation is now, that is not a Christian society. We are Christians living in society now, okay? What our nation was built on, it is no longer built on that. And so there are going to be times when there's friction because of that. If we know where we cannot compromise, if we know where God has called us to stand boldly, unapologetically bold, then we know what battles are ours to fight. And it's different for everybody. And it's going to come in a different way for everybody because we're all unique and we're not made the same and we don't respond the same and we don't have the same passions. That's how God keeps this a world ticking and moving forward, is that we're all uniquely different. So my passions, my frictions, my convictions aren't necessarily always going to be the same as yours. Now, there are things that are foundationally important. Life, foundationally important. The design of man and woman, male and female, foundationally important. Salvation comes only through Jesus. That is foundationally important. And knowing those things is wildly important when you're talking about having courage to obey God when pressured to compromise. If you don't know what it means to be obedient to God, if you don't know the laws and the expectations that God has for you, then you're not going to know when to stand and when to sit down. So first stop, get to know that. Get to know what the truth is about God and humanity and the 10 Commandments and the design that God has for humanity and his people. Get to know what it means and looks like and sounds like to obey God in your everyday life. That way, when something big comes your way and you have to decide, how do I obey without compromising? How do I honor and still not compromise or waver in my faith? You got to work that faith muscle, you guys. You got to work that brain in the truth so that it becomes something that you know so well that when lies come in or when challenges come in, you can combat it with the truth. That's the goal here, you guys. That's why you have a reading plan. That's why I always want you to be in the Bible with me. That's why I want you to show up here every week. That's why I want you to come to the live events. That's why I want you to do the Bible studies, you guys. That's why I want you to be in church, because this world is going to continue to decline. And so we need to know what we stand on, what we stand for, and why. Daniel knew what the truth was, what he stood for, and why he stood for it, so that when the time came, when the friction came, he knew what to do and he knew how to do it. We need to start getting there. We need to start being there. We need to get serious about the faith that we have and trusting God to be faithful in complicated situations, because we know the story that we have with God. We know the stories of his faithfulness. In Hebrews It says, I remembered to come back and read this section. I'm so proud of myself. Hebrews 11 is called the Hall of Faith because it all is about the faithfulness of the people that went before us. So it says, and what more can I say? Time is too short for me to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets who by faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the raging of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, gained strength in weakness, became mighty in battle, and put foreign armies to flight. This is just listing, and it goes on to just continue to list the people that went before us that had great faith and that put that faith into practice and all of the things that they did to do so. So find that in Hebrews 11, find this story in Daniel 6, and get with God. Get with God on it this week, you guys, and see what he's telling you. The question for today is, where do you need courage to obey God when you're pressured to compromise? So where do you need to seek courage in your life to hold tight to the truth intention? Okay. All right. Daniel and the Lion's Den. What a great story. So go read it for yourself. Get in that reading plan this week, and I will see y'all back here next week. Bye for now.
Today